Thank you very much for joining us this morning to talk about a very timely issue, Ecuador's asylum for Julian Assange. Ecuador's President Rafael Correa has won some praise in the international community for granting asylum to WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Most of Assange's supporters are fixated on the possibility that he might face charges in the United States for his systematic leaking of classified U.S. foreign policy memoranda. Facts are that Assange is wanted for questioning in Sweden on 2 separate sexual assault charges, and now in Britain for bail violations. President Correa's decision has shed some light, attracted some attention to his record at home. His critics complain of his systematic concentration of power in the presidency, undermining of democratic institutions, as well as the suppression of free expression and media rights. We have invited our panelists to share their thoughts on the significance of the Assange asylum decision and whether Correa will manage to improve his international image and possibly emerge as a leader of the left in Latin America as Hugo Chavez either loses his election bid or his bout with cancer. Our first panelist, and they'll speak in succession and we'll throw it open to questions. I've asked them to limit their comments to about 10 or so minutes, is José Cárdenas, who is acting assistant administrator of Latin American and the Caribbean at the U.S. Agency for International Development in the Bush administration. He joined the administration in February 2004 and served more than 2 years as senior advisor in the Western Hemisphere Bureau of the State Department. In August 2006, Mr. Cárdenas joined the National Security Council staff, serving as a director in the Western Hemisphere Directorate until November 2007. Previously, he served in senior positions at the Organization of American States and at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Mr. Cárdenas began his career advocating on behalf of a free Cuba with the Cuban American National Foundation, which he joined as a staff assistant before working his way up to its director of Washington operations. José.
Thank you, Roger. Much of the commentary in recent weeks about the Julian Assange's seeking of the diplomatic protection of the Ecuadorian embassy in London has focused mainly on what people suggest are what strange bedfellows they make. I don't think, in my opinion, that they make such strange bedfellows. In fact, I think that that Assange seeking that diplomatic protection of the Ecuadorian embassy, quite frankly, exposes him as a fraud. I think that somebody who styles himself as a paladin of the free flow of information and government transparency would seemingly take issue with any number of countries in the world: Russia, China, Iran. These are where the serious problems are of freedom of information, transparency, but yet Julian Assange attacks the United States by leaking sensitive documents that harm the United States' ability to play a leadership role in instituting some sort of, or guiding some semblance of international order. And I think that that betrays an ideological agenda. So in seeking diplomatic protection, this individual, Julian Assange, who wants to be seen as a champion of free flow of information, chooses a government that is described in the following way. This is a 2011 report by the Committee to Protect Journalists. It says Correa has brought Ecuador into a new era of widespread repression by preempting private news broadcasts, enacting restrictive legal measures, smearing critics, and filing debilitating defamation lawsuits. Reporters Without Borders reports that 17 Ecuadorian media outlets have been closed, have been shut down since the beginning of this year. Nearly all of them critical, of the Ecuadorian, of the Correa government. The Washington Post called it the most comprehensive and ruthless assault on free media underway in the Western Hemisphere. So to me, when you have an individual like Rafael Correa, who has risen to power on a likewise ideological agenda against the prevailing international order, in which he feels Ecuador obviously does not have a particularly significant role. You have two men basically joining hands in what is really an anti-system crusade. And I call it a marriage of malcontents. And also, I have referred to Julian Assange and Rafael Correa as Pied Pipers of anarchy. And why is that? Well, here's what Rafael Correa said about offering Julian Assange diplomatic asylum. This is not about patching up systems that have not worked for centuries. It is about changing the systems. And that is why we are clashing with national and international powers that want things to stay as they are. Frankly, that quote could have easily come from Julian Assange. So basically, I believe that what you have here are two individuals who feel self-alienated from the international system, and they are acting out against it. And I think it's a very dangerous attempt to unilaterally rewrite the rules of international order, such as they are, in service of a radical agenda. Julian Assange is wanted in Sweden, of all places, for questioning. And they are going to pretend that this is a political asylum case going on in London. I believe that there are certain rules in place, there are certain international norms that have been built up last 5 or 6 decades. It is not a perfect system. Of course it's not. But it has ushered in a remarkable level of stability, historically speaking, and also pulled billions out of poverty across the world. So I don't believe that there is a justification for giving Julian Assange political asylum, and I think that all countries of goodwill who are participating in an effort to extend and protect the international system have no business abiding by this attempt to unilaterally rewrite the rules.
Great, thank you very much. We'll say that will give us lots of time for questions and answers and a free-wheeling discussion here. Mark Weisbrot is director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington. He has written and spoken extensively on economic policy, especially on Latin America and international economic policy in general. Mr. Weisbrot also writes a weekly column for The Guardian Unlimited, as well as a regular column on economic and policy issues that is distributed to over 550 newspapers by McClatchy Tribune Information Services. His opinion pieces have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the LA Times, among other major U.S. Regional and really global newspapers. Mr. Weisbrot appears regularly on national and local television and radio programs. He is also the president of Just Foreign Policy. Mark.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. And if anybody wants more information, you can find it in English and Spanish at CEPR.net. So I think the Assange case is actually pretty simple, and it's pretty obvious. This is a case where somebody had a well-founded fear of persecution by the United States government. The evidence for this is overwhelming. I don't even have time in my 10 minutes. By the way, I noticed it's 2 or 3 against 1 here. That's pretty standard for Washington concept of a level playing field. So I just want to, I'll make a few points about it that make it obvious. I mean, the most obvious thing is that Assange isn't even charged with a crime in Sweden, and yet they put out a European arrest warrant and insist that he has to go there. Why can't the prosecutor interview him in the UK? This is one of the offers that the Ecuadorian government made to him. They also offered to turn him over to the Swedish government if they would just promise not to extradite him to the United States, where you have the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee has more than twice already said that he should be prosecuted for espionage, and other high officials have said similar things. So, and you have the Australian government last month, documents obtained there in the Australian press from the Australian government show that the United States was still pursuing Assange, an ongoing investigation. So there's so much evidence, it's so obvious, and if it wasn't really obvious to everyone in the world that this case was not about some allegations in Sweden, it was obvious after the UK threatened to invade the Ecuadorian embassy. And you talk about violations of international, rewriting the international order. I mean, this is the Vienna Convention. This is the foundation of diplomacy in the world. Nobody threatens to invade another embassy. No democratic country has done this in the last 70 or 100 years. And this is what they did. Does anybody here really believe that they would have done this, the UK government would have done this, if it was just about somebody who was wanted for questioning in another country, who could be questioned anywhere? So the fact that the Swedish government, the UK government, and the US government wouldn't even negotiate with Ecuador to reach a solution where he could go to Sweden and face the questioning shows to me, and of course the threat to invade, this is just bad faith, and it's obvious that there's another agenda here. And I don't think we even need to go into more of that. I mean, why do they hate him? Because he released a video of US soldiers from an Apache helicopter in Iraq shooting down people in cold blood, and including 2 Reuters reporters. So this is not good. They don't like it. You know, you mentioned that why doesn't he go after other countries? Well, those documents embarrassed a lot of governments in the world. A lot of governments. In fact, they weren't very flattering to the Brazilian or the Ecuadorian government, and yet Lula was one of the first people in 2010, when Assange was arrested, to say, you know, this is wrong, and where are the other governments defending freedom of speech? You know, so maybe you have a psychological analysis of Lula and acting out as well. But the point is, any democratic independent government in South America would have done the same thing. This is a case of persecution. And this is a case where really they had no choice but to grant asylum. And we'll see how much the UK respects the rule of law if the Ecuadorian government goes to the International Court of Justice, as I think they should do, and says, you have to give Assange safe passage out of the country because he has asylum. He has political or diplomatic asylum, whichever you want to call it, and he shouldn't be imprisoned in this embassy simply because the United States government and its allies in this case, the UK and Sweden, don't want him to be free. And by the way, Sweden has a terrible history here too. You know, in 2000, history of violating international human rights on behalf of the U.S. government. In 2000, they deported 2 Egyptians to the Mubarak regime, where they were tortured. Everybody knew they would be tortured. They did this in cooperation with the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, and the UN found this to be a human rights violation, and they had to pay compensation to the victims. So this shows you what is really going on here. Sweden and the UK do not really have an independent foreign policy of the United States. They are doing what the United States wants them to do in this case, and Assange has very good reason to fear what would happen to him if he were actually taken to Sweden, thrown in jail there, which he would be, and then extradited to the United States. And you know, the UK and the Swedish government had a real easy way out. They could just say, well, you know, that's part of the treaty, by the way. If the UK doesn't waive their right, they can say that he's only going to Sweden. And that's their right. So they could have said that. And then he would have 45 days when the Swedish government, until the Swedish government is through with him, to do whatever he wants. But they wouldn't do that because they have another political agenda. Now, just in my remaining time here, I'd like to say something about the false things that were said about Ecuador, including by the Committee to Protect Journalists, which I think has really misrepresented the situation in Ecuador, talking about media repression there. First of all, there is really no media repression in Ecuador, and I was just there recently. I mean, you wouldn't recognize the country from the descriptions that you're hearing here. You know, on Friday, for example, Lucio Gutierrez got on the radio, national radio, and said that the election in 2009 was stolen and that he had evidence that hundreds of thousands of votes were just stolen. I mean, this is something that wouldn't even happen here in the United States. I don't even think your friends at Fox News would put on something like this. And if they did, they would certainly ridicule the person who had said it. And yet, this was presented as though this were just something that, some kind of legitimate charge against the government. And so, this is the kind of thing you see on Ecuadorian, in the Ecuadorian media. You don't see evidence of intimidation. I haven't seen evidence that journalists are afraid to put this kind of stuff on the air or in the newspapers or the editorials. And so I think that this is really a gross exaggeration. Now, of course, it is true that the president sued El Universo for libel and defamation, and he won. And he said, by the way, all along that he wasn't looking to collect money or put anybody in jail, but he wanted to set the record straight. And the Supreme Court found that he had indeed been libeled, and I have the editorial in question right here in English and Spanish if anyone wants to read it, and it's very clear that he was being accused of crimes and committing crimes against humanity, and this was false. And you know, truth is an absolute defense to defamation, of course, and if the paper could show that this was true, they wouldn't have trouble. Now, I personally am against criminal libel laws in any country, but the fact is they exist. Germany has laws against neo-Nazi propaganda. France has laws against denying the Holocaust, and in fact they just recently used it against one of the major political leaders in the country, Le Pen, who was sentenced for denying crimes against humanity. And so these laws are in other countries. We can see it also recently in India and in Indonesia. Google had to take the film about the so-called film about the innocence of Muslims off the web because of laws in those countries. So you can debate what kind of laws are worth having or are threats to freedom of expression, or whether a public official should be able to sue a newspaper for lying about them. But, you know, in the UK you can do that. In the US actually public officials can sue, but there's a higher standard. In the UK it's not so hard to win a judgment, and in fact I think in this case I think an official in the United Kingdom would have also won this case. But really, all you have to do is look at the Ecuadorian media, and you can see that this is not a media that is repressed. This is not a media that even has the kind of restrictions that we have in the United States. You know, I'll give you another example from the United States. In 2004, in the presidential, 2 weeks before the presidential election, the largest broadcasting chain in the country, the Sinclair Broadcasting, wanted in TV, a collection of TV stations, wanted to show a film that alleged that John Kerry was a traitor in Vietnam. And 19 senators wrote a letter to the Federal Communications Commission, and some of them publicly threatened the broadcast license of Sinclair TV, and they didn't show that film. Okay? That is how it works here. We have rules, and the media doesn't go over the line like it does in Ecuador and in Latin America in general. So you have a struggle going on between a media that is a political actor, okay, and you have a government that was elected to carry out a certain program. And so you see, this is what's going on here, and it's being misrepresented as though it's a struggle for free speech. You know, I don't agree with criminal libel laws, but I wouldn't say that what happened in France was really a fight over free speech, okay? Or that was the government trying to repress a political leader from expressing his point of view. This was another thing going on. And you could argue about these laws. And like I said, I'm against them. But to try and create the impression that Ecuador is a place where there's not freedom of speech, not freedom of the press, I mean, this is a complete misrepresentation of what Ecuador is like, and it's a complete misrepresentation of what is actually going on there, not only in Ecuador, but in Argentina, in Brazil, where they had to create a public TV station for the first time in 2007, because the media is against the government. What do you think it would look like here if we elected a left president, okay? And the thing is, we wouldn't do it. We would not, we have enough rules so the media cannot do the kinds of things that it does in Ecuador, in Bolivia, in Argentina, and other left governments in South America. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. Gustavo Palacio is the president of the nonprofit organization Democracy International Ecuador. Mr. Palacio, a career diplomat from Ecuador, served as consul general and charge d'affaires for his country in Moscow. He also served as representative to the Ecuadorian mission at the United Nations, as well as executive director at the American Development Bank and the OAS in the last decade. He subsequently served as international relations manager for Nobis Group from 2007 to 2011. Mr. Palacio writes for the electronic newspaper Ecuador en Vivo and serves as research fellow at the Georgetown University's Latin America Center, where he is currently working on projects focused on sustainable development, democracy, U.S.-Latin American relations, and authoritarian populism. Gustavo.
Thank you very much, Roger. First, let me thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Roger, for organizing this important panel on Ecuador. It's one of the few places where you can talk openly about my small country, beautiful country I love. But also thank you, José Cárdenas and Roger, for the work you have done, for your interest in the region, for the cause of democracy, freedom of expression, not only in Ecuador, but in the region in general. Thank you, Mark, for your interest also in Ecuador. Next time, please, when you go to Ecuador, let me know, because I will like to connect you with the right people, so you could see the real Ecuador and what is going on indeed in my country. First, I want to give you a different perspective of this issue. And let me start by giving you a historical perspective of my country. My country is a small, beautiful country. It rests in the Pacific, in South America, in the Pacific, coastal Pacific, the Andean region, and the Amazon. And we have the Galapagos Islands. So we have four different, completely different regions, and we are very proud of it, because Ecuador is considered one of the richest countries in terms of biodiversity. It's a multi-ethnic, multicultural country. Unfortunately, Ecuador, like many other Latin American countries, it has a record of exclusion, inequity. Till now, we still face problems like racism, machismo, inequity, intolerance, domestic violence, especially against women, against children, who suffer the most. We have poverty. We are underdeveloped. But because of the globalization, we are part also of the new world and modernity and the future. So we are a mix of things now. But despite the efforts Ecuadorian people have made along the history to modernize, to become modern in terms of democracy, of have equal rights for everybody, equal opportunities for everybody in terms of education, especially. So we could have a division of powers and independent justice. We haven't achieved that for different reasons. and that's a matter of discussion in a different panel. But what I want to remark is we have been trying doing this. And the last important effort we Ecuadorian people started to do has to deal with the emergency of new actors in Ecuadorian political activity. And one of the main actors in this mainstream was in the 90s and in the 2000s with the Indian groups and the Indian movement. The first big march to Quito was in 1991 with the government of Rodrigo Borja, Social Democrat. And that was a changing point, a turning point in our modern history toward a better society, a more equal society in terms of opportunity. And as you probably know from the news, Ecuador have a record of deposing presidents. You know, Mawat, I remember, was incredible in when he was deposed. I filmed that, and I have an interesting tape, and where you can see the military, the Indians, and civil society, mainly mestizos, few white people, marching together. And they were full of hope. I remember among them was Lucio Gutierrez, by the way, General Paco Moncayo. I remember Alberto Acosta was there too. By the way, for those who doesn't know, he was the main sponsor of Correa, and now he's in the opposition. He's candidate for the left, for the real left in Ecuador. And he considers Correa a dictator, apprentice of dictator, as he said. But this attempt with the new actors, with the new social movement, didn't achieve a good goal. And so we have the presidents going on, deposed Lucio, then Bucaran was deposed, and then after Correa, when Correa became Minister of Economy, he found this ground very ready for a big change, and the population united and hoping for a big transformation of Ecuador. And the left movement sponsored Correa. He was unknown. He doesn't have a record on the left movements or the social movements, and that's something that you can read on the papers today from those who sponsor him. Those who are with Correa now belong to what we call, among others, the new Boliburguesia, like in Venezuela, the new rich that make deals with the state, and not legally precisely. So that was the situation that we have in Ecuador when this government of the revolution, sponsored by the social movements, became to power. Unfortunately, it was not what they thought it will be. And the most important reason for that is that he started to move to the right. He changed everything. He changed the constitution. He changed everything to control, to have all the powers. But once he got that, the National Assembly, following the same path that Chavez, he forgot about his allies. The Indian movement became alienated from the government. The workers' movement became alienated. The students, the young people, the ecologists. And now, if you read the Informe a la Nación, made by the 10th of August by Correa, you can see his economic policy is the same extractivist policy, to take out all the natural resources, to exploit the natural resources, So to diminish poverty, to fight poverty. And we have diminished poverty, yes, in few percentages. I want to come back to this point later. Let me now, so a complete disappointment with Korea from these social groups, and they started to leave the government, and only the right state, the right groups, some groups that were his friends when he was at school, and business people, business-minded people, Alvarados, Saman, Alexis Mera, and many others. I can give you a countless list of these people who never were in the left. They never been even thought about social issues. And so let me give you now another important input about what was the political situation that Ecuador had and the government had when they made this decision to give asylum to Assange, to Julian Assange. And it was a worrisome landscape, a troublesome landscape, because Korea, because of this disappointment, national disappointment with him, started to fall in the polls. It started to lose credibility, he and his government. Despite his charisma, and we have to recognize, he's a very good communicator, like Reagan was a very good communicator. And people supported him because, people with charisma, good communicators. And he says, I am tall, I'm 185, I have green eyes, I have a PhD. So he's different, he's a gentleman, good with cameras. And so he fell in trouble. And why he was in trouble? And I can give you a big list of things, but the most important, corruption. And the first corruption cases, it's not only in the Universo, the 80 million he wanted from the Universo. The first corruption cases started with the FARC, when the FARC gave him money. And there is a video you can see from Bono Jojoy, complaining about Korea's treason and attitude toward the FARC. And Korea said, oh well, if they gave me any money, I didn't receive, so ask the person who they gave the money. And if you know the people in Ecuador, everybody says yes. There were 300,000, 400,000, not that much money. They received money from the FARC. And there's this video. And you can see the computers of the Reyes. That there is this information. But, and then we have other, just let me mention few. We can talk later. I don't have a web page, but I can give you my email address, my telephone number. I can give you the whole information. It will take hours to talk about the cases of corruption. More than 8,000 cases. It will take us like 2 years, working 10 hours per day, Saturday and Sunday, to talk about the corruption cases of this country. Unique in the world. So, but let me just point out the most important ones. His brother, his small brother, the oldest brother, Fabricio. Fabricio was one of the 3 campaign collectors, and he has made statements about the FARC contribution. So you can read that. And Fabricio received some millions of dollars, like Saman as well, Camilo Saman, remember that name too. Camilo Saman also received money, and Fabricio was part of the Korea's team, part of the government. You could see him till 2009 on the platform when his brother was dancing and shouting, and crying with him. With his cell, probably making some important economics decisions. And His brother is an engineer. All of a sudden, excuse me if I take a little bit longer.
Just 1 or 2 more minutes,
Okay, very fast.
because we can get to.
Well, all of a sudden he became one of the richest men, not only in Ecuador, in Latin America, with hundreds of millions of contracts with the government. Correa said that first he said it was illegal, then he said it's not legal, so he contradicted himself, and now his brother was one of the richest, and 2 journalists wrote a book about this, and Correa sued them. Why did he sue them for $10 million? $10 million. One of them is the director of Vanguardia, who was confiscated just 2 weeks ago, the equipment. And you say there's no problems with the freedom of expression in Ecuador. You tell me, you dare to tell me that there's no freedom of expression in Ecuador. Come on. But let me finish with and we can come back to the corruption issues. The third point I want to make is about the decision of Korea. Because we have elections in February, and the left, consider him a traitor and is discrediting him in all ways possible. The people who have still some credibility, because they have lost credibility for supporting Korea. So he faces a scenario where he needs to portray and position himself as the leader of the left, a place where he never belonged, where he was never part of it. And this opportunity, Assange, was a big opportunity to position himself as part of the left, the rescue hero that goes for the Robin Hood, the new global Robin Hood, Julian Assange. Another opportunist who found this opportunist Korea to save himself. And I agree, there's important information that have to be public about the crimes. And I think everybody agrees on this. Obama is probably one of the persons who also agree with that. But another reason for this, for giving asylum to Assange, Korea never failed, has never been accepted even among the left internationally. They don't trust him. Fidel Castro, rumors say, and we have a lot of people who know well Cuba and Ecuador and who are against Korea, who made comments. They don't trust, the Cubans don't trust Korea. He's an opportunist person. So Korea desperately needs somehow to reach them somehow, and it needs to pay proofs. So this is another opportunity. And also he's thinking, okay, Chavez has this health problem. He probably is going to pass away. And there are no many other communicators as good as I am, good looking. So this is my opportunity. And Patiño, his servant as Minister of Foreign Affairs, is also in trouble because he's one of the few, left from the left. That he never left Korea. He had too many links with Korea. So he's in trouble because the surrounding of Korea is completely in the right-wingers and corrupted people. So Patiño doesn't want to lose power. And he was losing power. There is a fight. That's another proof of the crisis of the government, the internal crisis. People are deserting. Everybody deserts at some point. Just recently, Diego Borja, former Minister of Economy, deserted, accusing the government of corruption. And so Patiño, he studied in Mexico, he went to Nicaragua, he knows Ortega well, and he started to visit Cuba and visit Iran, created this platform and said, listen, everybody thinks that you could be the next international leader and the next heir of Chavez. And he convinced Chavez, give him an opportunity. He's not that bad guy. We can trust him. We can control him.
So give him an opportunity, and he started to work on this, and Assange was part of this strategy. I want to finish on things for now. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Gustavo, for that very interesting description of the reality there in Ecuador. Let me ask a couple of questions, and I'll throw it open to questions here. A couple of quick questions. Jose, much has been said that the media in a lot of countries in Latin America, not just Ecuador, have historically been in the hands of wealthy economic groups and who are natural opponents of these regimes that bring about change and democratically elected to do so. And they, in point of fact, in many cases become sort of protagonists, political protagonists, so they kind of get in the crossfire. So what has been the result of some of these policies to sort of rein in these wealthy economic groups that hold the media? This happened in Argentina, certainly in Venezuela and other places. What has been the result of this?
I think it's a legitimate point that in the marketplace there are certainly important interests that own media outlets and project a definite point of view and are out to basically move the needle politically within their own countries. But the problem is in these countries ruled by populist governments, whether in Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, is that instead of building up alternative media, they are working to shut down the media outlets that they identify in their own eyes as a representative of a business interest. It's not that you build up and multiply and get more voices into the political marketplace. Their answer has been to pull the plug, all the while taking over other operations so that they spout nothing but the government line.
Mark, you alluded a couple of times to rules in the United States about that govern freedom of expression. When I look at Ecuador, I haven't been to Ecuador for a couple of years or so, and so I depend on these groups like Reporters Without Borders, Committee for Protection of Journalists, the Inter-American Press Association, whose president is here on the editorial board, Milton Coleman for Washington Post. Washington Post is editorialized about this, the OAS freedom of expression, and they give an appraisal of Ecuador that is starkly different than your sort of sanguine view. And I'm thinking maybe it has something to do with the way you see things in general, because what are these rules that are so good in the United States that govern freedom of expression? I think if 17 senators threaten an American newspaper, television chain to not run a video and they'll pull their FEC license, I think that's bad. And by the way, you can hear complaints about people stealing elections in this country almost on a daily basis, certainly around campaign season, and these people are prosecuted for making those kinds of accusations or sued by the government. President Obama hasn't sued Rupert Murdoch. So where do you think this line should be in terms of the government or the state getting the kind of media that it wants?
Well, that's a legitimate question about where the lines should be. I mean, should the media... I mean, first of all, we have rules here. We had stronger rules in the past until the 1980s when the Reagan administration got rid of it, we had the Fairness Doctrine, which dates back to the 1940s, which said that in coverage of political issues, the radio and then later TV had to be fair. They had to be balanced. So, you know, when you have a monopoly over a broadcast frequency, as you know, any FCC commissioner can tell you, you have responsibilities as well. You have a privilege. You have a monopoly over a part of the broadcast spectrum. And according to our law, which is no longer enforced, you're supposed to fulfill those obligations. So I think it's different in every country. And yeah, you could argue that they shouldn't have threatened them or with regard to that film. But on the other hand, 2 weeks before the election, with, you know, probably there wouldn't even be time for rebuttal. I mean, we have laws around our elections too about how, you know, about the media reporting results before the polls are closed. These are judgment calls. But in terms of the bigger question, you know, the portrayal, I mean, you know, there's been a lot of allegations here, you know. Jose says they closed down 17 radio stations. Well, I looked at all of those cases. It's a little boring, but there wasn't any evidence, and CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, did not present any evidence in any one of those cases that there was a political motive or that it was related to anything that any one of those stations said. And they said, in fact, CPJ said, just to correct the record, that about half of them, or more than half, were not political at all. So, again, there are rules. If you don't renew your license, you don't necessarily get a free pass. Just because these rules weren't enforced in the past, too bad. I mean, the 80% of the media in Ecuador is private, and it's mostly opposed to the government. So now there's competition. This is what people, I mean, you know, if I want to conjecture about the Committee to Protect Journalists, I mean, look at their funders. They're all big media groups. They don't like competition, okay? The state is giving them competition. And these allegations about corruption, there's corruption everywhere in this hemisphere. If you look, unique, Ecuador is unique. Hey, what about the United States? You know, Jimmy Carter just said this week that we have the worst elections in the world, but one of the worst electoral systems in the world, because it's so corrupted by money, okay? So we've legalized a certain form of corruption here, you know? You can buy the Congress, all right? Legally, instead of having to offer a bribe. So, I mean, who's not corrupt in this hemisphere? Now, and so is it particularly worse? Has it gotten worse under Correa? I don't really see that. And in these cases, the case that you mentioned where he sued about the case with his brother, I mean, my understanding of that case, and I don't have time to go into all these, because like I said, a lot of these are just allegations, right? A lot of them, I mean, you said rumors, okay, about Castro, whatever, you know. But in this case, as I understand it, he sued because they lied about his own role. He was not aware of the contracts of his brother, according to him. They argued that he was somehow involved, and so that was the dispute. And again, I have to emphasize that in the El Universo case, he did sue, as you mentioned, for $80 million or $40 million, whatever it was. Well, fine, but the point is, he immediately pardoned them and got rid of the money and said again, well before the judgment, before the Supreme Court upheld the judgment, he said, I'm not interested in the money, I want the record corrected. So it was a perfectly legitimate thing to do in my mind. The guy, one of the biggest papers in the country is saying he murdered people, that he committed crimes against humanity. He wants to correct the record. The media has a near monopoly. Sure, you've got state TV, but the vast majority of the media is private and against the government. How does he do it? He goes to court. He gets the court to show that they lied. And then he says, fine, you're free. You don't have to worry about anything. Okay, so is that intimidating to the media? Maybe, but you know, personally, I wouldn't care if Obama sued some of these idiots that say he's not born in the United States. I mean, why not, okay? He probably, you know, he'd have a tougher case because we have a special case law around public officials. You have to prove that not only that it was false, but that it was intentional, essentially. So he'd have a tougher case, but why not do it just to clear it up? Because, you know, right now, you know, thanks to some of the right-wing media, you got a huge percentage of the population that actually believes that he's a Muslim, he wasn't born in the United States, whatever. So I think this is a battle. Both sides are using the tools available to them, but the media is doing what it wants to do. And the idea, by the way, that Correa, you know, I didn't think I'm not happy actually that I come to the AEI to get a left critique of the Ecuadorian government. I didn't think that's where I'd have to go. But, you know, so yeah, he's made compromises, yeah. He believes that he needs foreign exchange, so they have to export national resources. You know, welcome to the world of politics, folks. I mean, every government in Latin America, why not send Lula to hell too, and Dilma as well, for the, you know, their policies with regard to the central bank and the monetary policy and everything else. I mean, everybody makes compromises. The idea that, you know, and Lucio Gutierrez has called him a dictator. Well, Lucio Gutierrez was just on TV or radio saying that, you know, that the election was stolen. Imagine somebody getting on TV and saying that the 2008, Obama stole the 2008 election. I'm supposed to take this guy seriously. So this is what we're talking about here. I mean, you know, Correa didn't have a problem with his popularity. Did it ever fall below like 57%? I mean, I don't see it, okay? He's a popular president, and it's not just because, yeah, he's charismatic. We know that. He's a good-looking guy. Okay, fine. But, you know, he also has seriously reduced inequality. He also has, for one of the first things the government did was double the payment to basically the equivalent of what we used to have aid to families with dependent children, to poor families. They've vastly expanded credit for housing and construction. And so people have seen real improvements in their life. By the way, increasing access to health care as well, and doubling the percentage of GDP spent on health care, and increasing spending on education. I mean, and not to mention that it's one of the fastest growing economies in the hemisphere. Just over the last year, it's grown 8%. So yeah, he's a popular president because he's delivered what he said, or at least what he could deliver. And yeah, you're going to have people on the left, just like you have in Bolivia and Venezuela and Argentina and Brazil. You have people on the left say that's not enough. Well, good for them, you know. There should always be people on the left saying it's not enough. That's what democracy is about. But that doesn't mean the government has sold out all the people that they ran for. The reason he's getting so much heat from the media is not because he didn't deliver enough. It's because he's delivering. It's because he's challenging the oligarchy that used to run the country and still owns the media. That's what's going on.
Just a quick comment. There's been a lot of talk about what are the limits to free flow of information. What are the red lines? Where is the line? And I must confess that I don't know enough about Julian Assange's philosophy to know what limits he believes there should be on the free flow of information. And I believe that there should be limits. Yes, you don't yell out fire in a movie theater. And I also believe you don't put out stolen confidential information out into the public domain where you are jeopardizing people's lives.
The New York Times did.
So, well, that they should be held accountable. And Julian Assange should be held accountable.
Okay, that's consistent at least.
Mark said that they all use these different protagonists use the tools that are available to them. The tool available to Correa are the courts, and the courts are a free, independent branch of government anymore in Ecuador?
No, unfortunately, no. We have, I think, the seeds of totalitarianism in Ecuador. That's my personal opinion. It's interesting because from the right to the left, everybody agrees that we don't have democracy. Some people call it democradura, constitutional dictatorship, apprentice of dictatorship, and you see, everybody agrees that something is wrong with Ecuador. The concentration is obvious, the concentration of power in the hands of not only one government, one man. because it's a very unique case, very similar to Chavez, different though, but the essence is the same. I want to, if you allow me, to make three comments. One on the article, and very briefly, my brother wrote this article, and yes, Emilio Palacio, like many Ecuadorians, is convinced that Correa produced the tragic events of September the 30th in Ecuador in 2011. But he knew that he couldn't write it and say it openly because of the consequences that this could have for him and his family. And because he was already persecuted, like many others in Ecuador. There are 200 Indian leaders persecuted in Ecuador. There are reports of human rights from different organizations, and you can see that. If you want to be blind, don't read them. But if you want to know the truth, please get informed and know what is going on in Ecuador. And so, what the point I want to make is that my brother wrote this article using the conditional. There is a report even from a lexicologist saying that Emilio Palacio didn't accuse President Correa. Yes, it was in his mind, like in Ecuador's mind is now, that he was the responsible for what happened. He went to the hospital and called the military to rescue him and mounted this show portraying himself as a victim of a coup d'etat, arrested many people, among others Coronel Carrion. He spent more than a year in prison, and they couldn't prove anything. There are no responsibles. So they couldn't find anything. The next day of this tragedy, all the evidence disappeared, was completely wiped away by the government. So this article in Spanish, if you don't know Spanish,
I have it right here.
So you ask somebody who knows exactly what does it mean. Conditional doesn't mean a sentence that accuses it directly. So that's why the grammar provides these different possibilities for language expressions. So that's one question.
Just take one more minute, please.
Okay. What is most important and is at risk now is democracy again in Ecuador, because we have elections in February. And Correa knows that he will have to respond for the corruption cases, for the violation of human rights, sooner or later. So he needs time. He's trying to win time and stay in power so he could avoid to respond for these corruption cases and for the violation of human rights to the law. He knows that any government that will come after him will be forced to sue him for these cases, and he and his group will have to go somewhere in the world to hide. And so he needs these elections to win, and he's going to do everything. The tribunal that rules the elections now, everybody in that tribunal belong to the government, were employees of the government. Before, we have a electoral council, where the different parties had representatives. So they control each other. So the elections were more or less clear. Regarding the polls, according to the official polls, Correa has 40-something% of popularity. Remember that the last referendum, the official polls, said that he had Santiago Perez. You can read it on the internet. He does polls for the government every week, and he's paid for that. So according to his poll, he's in the 40-something percentage.
the Santiago Perez polls in the last referendum were showing figures over the 60s, 70%, and the government was triumphalist. They went even dancing, and they had a party at around 8 o'clock at night to celebrate their triumph. And all of a sudden, information started to come in and started to show that, but that was a different electoral system, by the way. It started to show that it was a very tight election, and they lost even in two questions of the 11 of the referendum, and the most of the votes were no more than 40-something, 45%, 47%. If you don't count the nulls and the other votes, Correa had less than 40% altogether from the whole population in his favor. So what I want to, the message I want to transmit is, please be aware of the elections in Ecuador. We don't have a consul that we can trust. Even now, there are a lot of scandals regarding the qualifications of the movement and parties to participate. For example, the Indian movement, Pachakutik movement, is not been approved yet. And it's a historical movement. They don't want to recognize them to participate in elections. They are supporting, with the other left groups, the candidate of the left, which is Alberto Acosta. Neither the MPD, the teachers and students movement, they also are not approved yet. So this is the message we need, that the public community, the international community, pay attention to what is going on in Ecuador. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to questions from the audience. I'll repeat the questions because we don't have a roving mic. So please just tell me who you are and what your question is.
My name is Emily Willard. I have 2 quick questions for Mr. Cárdenas. One of them is, let's just assume there is repression of the media in Ecuador. Is it possible that Assange could seek asylum there simply to bring attention to this and so that we're having these discussions now? And then the second question is, what are your, to address your question about the line between government transparency and protecting national security, what is your opinion on, what do you think the role whistleblowers play? Because Julian Assange could be considered a whistleblower, specifically in regards to the video of the shooting, because the Reuters had asked under the Freedom of Information Act, and the Department of Defense said it didn't exist. So then the film was released, but then I think that's a harder case to make about WikiLeaks.
Okay, let me just repeat the questions for José Cárdenas that the young lady asked. Is it possible that Julian Assange sought asylum in Ecuador in order to expose Correa's problems on freedom of expression? And we talk about that line between national security and freedom of expression. Isn't Assange on the whistleblower side of that line because he exposed military abuses that were otherwise denied?
Well, on the first question, I think that there's definitely a personal affinity between Assange and Rafael Correa. I do not think that Assange went there to bring attention to the difficult plight of many of the independent media in Ecuador. I think that affinity was pretty much in evidence in the Russian television interview. Russian television is of course funded by Vladimir Putin and has a starkly anti-American agenda. In that interview, which was done remotely, they joked, they laughed, they traded comments like, "Oh, welcome to the club of the persecuted, ha ha ha." On where the legitimate line lies, I think that if Julian Assange or WikiLeaks had exercised any discretion rather than their massive data dump into the public domain of thousands of cables, thousands of confidential reports, maybe they could have made that claim. But the way they went about it and was really, in my opinion, really an attempt to hurt the United States. It wasn't to call attention to a specific incident that could be, that could reward them with some sort of whistleblower status. They threw everything at the kitchen sink out there.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, please.
My name is José Ordóñez. I'm also Ecuadorian, and I've been following a lot of the cases of the stealing of Julian Assange and what is the media going out in Ecuador until today. But I haven't heard something important I think we should talk about it. It's like, what is the connection between the government of Ecuador with WikiLeaks? And so far, WikiLeaks have been helping to Rafael Correa to make some decisions. And Rafael Correa follows some of the leadership or advices that Julian Assange had given through this media. And he has been expelled, not just one, but two ambassadors representing the United States in Ecuadorian territory. I don't know if you can tell me a little bit more, like if there's some kind of connection. There's some kind of connection between why the Ecuadorian government was to keep on Julian Assange for what? What are you interested that Rafael Correa will have to have such character?
Okay, well, I'm not going to hit you with the top of this microphone because it will make noise. So, Gustavo, the gentleman asked, are there any sort of apparent connections between Assange and WikiLeaks and the Correa government, and has the Correa government sort of accepted the advice from WikiLeaks? Is there some sort of other deeper relationship here that's being exposed, or we should talk about at least?
Yeah. It's an interesting question, an important question. Just let me remind you that the first WikiLeaks that produced a big scandal in Ecuador was one made by the American Embassy reporting that Correa appointed as chief of the police a person accused of corruption. And he did that being aware of these accusations of corruption of the chief of police in order to manipulate him. Because of that, the ambassador of the United States was considered persona non grata. She had to leave the country. But the thing is that, the interesting thing is that everybody think about that, about Correa that way, in the diplomatic community, in the international community, and in the country. Everybody thinks that he's a manipulative person, and the facts prove that. So Assange is another case of manipulation. He needs to manipulate Assange. And the case is, as Vargas Llosa said, they're tal para cual. And Assange is manipulating Correa as well. Remember as well that the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, when the WikiLeaks appeared, said that it would be a good idea if Mr. Assange comes to Ecuador and gives us more information. And immediately Correa said that was wrong, and that that's not official, that he doesn't authorize those comments. And he added that Mr. Assange had committed he had violated some laws from other countries, and he was referring to the United States. So, but all of a sudden he started to change, and then we had this interview with the press, with the Moscow television, and they started to approximate. It seems that Ecuador, Correa sent two ambassadors to London to speak in English with Assange, because it seems there were nobody else in London, and so they made an agreement, and they agree on the terms of this alliance and asylum and everything.
I wrote an article you can read about what Assange could do in Ecuador, by the way.
Can I respond to that?
When he
too,
starts to do
Roger?
what, yes, please.
Yeah. I don't really buy this whole idea that somehow Ecuador has benefited from this, or Correa has benefited from this. I mean, does anybody read the press? I mean, look at the press. The whole world press has made Assange look like a rapist trying to, and by the way, the women involved in the case never accused him of rape. That was a word used by the Sweden in its European arrest warrant. You know, it's made it look horrible. Who in the whole international press is taking the side of Correa? And he didn't want this mess at all. And he wanted to worsen diplomatic relations with the United States, the UK, and Sweden. Those are three important countries for Ecuador. He's got the trade preferences here in the U.S. Congress, which have been in question for a couple of years now, and he very well might lose them. And so, it'd be different if there was a worldwide debate and the truth won out, and Correa looks great. But that's not what it is. I mean, 90% of the people you talk to think that don't even know that Assange wasn't charged with a crime in Sweden. They don't know. The media hasn't even asked the question, why can't the prosecutor come and question Assange in the UK? The media hasn't even asked, why can't they just guarantee that he's only going to Sweden and he's not going to be extradited to the US? The media has reported this more atrociously than almost anything I can think of in the last decade. Okay? And so Correa knows this. He knows what the international press is like. What does everybody know about Ecuador? As you know, hardly anybody knows anything about Ecuador. Well, you know what they know now, thanks to this case? They now know that CPJ says they have a repressive government. That's what he got out of this, okay? So he didn't want this. It's been an enormous pain to him. It's been an enormous pain to Patino, taking up all his time as well. And for what? What did they get out of it? They tried to settle this case. They offered Sweden and the UK 4 different alternatives at least, and they wouldn't even negotiate. They wouldn't even talk about it. They offered them everything they needed if they actually wanted to investigate the allegations, and they weren't interested. So no, I don't believe any of this. And by the way, in terms of WikiLeaks, they did offer the Pentagon to vet these cables before they were released and take out things or suggest things that might hurt anyone. And so far, by the way, there hasn't been a single case of any informant or anyone else being injured as a result of this. So it wasn't like they just dumped it on the world. In fact, my memory is they didn't even do the final dump. It was someone else. So so all of this stuff, I think, is really grossly exaggerated. The idea also that Correa wants to be the next Chavez. Yeah, that's a great thing to be too. Have all the media present you as the world's enemy. I mean, that's something really to aspire to be seen as Chavez is seen throughout most of the world. I don't think that's Correa's goal either.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. I think there were, yes, please.
So my question is for Mark. I really think that the idea that the media is controlled by the private sector and that Correa is using what means that he can to set the record straight, I find that a really convincing argument. Can you speak more about the media and especially your time in Ecuador and how that was?
The question is, it's apparent to this questioner that the media is controlled by the private sector and this is kind of a political confrontation and that Correa is doing what he has to do to sort of respond to that challenge, and he asks you to expand. He said very, very briefly on what you saw in the country in terms of that sort of relationship.
Well, I see a media that is still, it's still dominated by the private media and it's still opposed to the government. As I said, 80%. Is owned by the private media. You have a state TV as well, and so you have more competition than you've had in the past. But that is that's the kind of struggle that you see. They're presenting different stories. There was one study recently that showed that the major newspapers and media show the opposition legislators on TV 3 times as much as they show the pro-government legislators, and that was including El Telégrafo, which is government. So they included that in the mix, and it was still 3-1. So I think that's really the overall situation, and I think it is necessary. I don't see how, they've increased internet coverage from like 7 to 30% of the population. This is, by the way, not something that dictators do. And that's because they want people to have more information. That's what the government is trying to do, to make sure they have more information, and that the media at least fulfills some of its responsibilities to provide information.
Okay, great. Ambassador Aparicio.
There's a very interesting thing that is not related directly to Assange, but it's happening in Bolivia, and probably, Morales was very vocal supporting Assange and Correa, but now he has a senator, a Bolivian senator, who is very well respected, democratically elected, and he had to seek asylum at the Brazilian embassy in La Paz. And he's staying there for 3 months already, Bolivia. The government doesn't want to give him a salvoconducto, a passage, to leave the country and go to Brazil. Brazil has qualified him as a political crime, not as Morales' government wants to make people believe that he has problem with justice. And this shows you a little bit the double standards we see in Latin America. On one side they do one thing, on the other they do the extreme opposite. And by the way, nobody knows these things, because Assange, of course, is very famous, this senator, nobody knows him except in Bolivia. But these things are happening in the region, in a country like Bolivia, that after Cuba has more political prisoners, refugees, people in embassies, people seeking asylum, indigenous people from the Amazons being repressed and beaten and killed by this government that apparently represents the people. So I think it's very difficult to talk about Latin America. There are different things, different kinds of populisms, but at some point I don't buy these ideas that all these people from ALBA countries are really representative people and are fighting against the system. Aras Vargas Llosa is saying it's a group of climbers that really don't care about the people and really are destroying their countries. Very simple. Thank you.
Well,
Can I respond?
yes, I'm just going to repeat the soliloquy at some length. No, just kidding. He's pointing out that he doesn't buy this narrative that the ALBA countries are on the side of the people, they're elected democratically, they're bringing about these changes. When you see notorious cases in the case of Bolivia, a democratically elected senator got to seek refuge. He's an opponent of Evo Morales and had to seek refuge in the Brazilian embassy. And Morales, at the same time, is praising what Correa has done with offering Assange. So he just doesn't buy that narrative. And let's go down, and then we'll finish up on this question. Let's go down the line.
Thank you. And I think it's a great question to finish up on. And I think Ambassador Aparicio, basically, the answer is it all depends on whose ox is getting gored. And there is a double standard. And I think it also speaks to the perils of strongman politics. And I'll bet that if Mark and I sat down and decided to come up with the 3 things that are most wrong with Latin America, we'd probably agree: exclusion, marginalization, weak institutions, et cetera, et cetera. The question comes down to, what do you do about it? And I think that turning to men on a horse, populists that rule from the balcony, is the wrong way to go. These individuals, whether Chavez, Morales, Correa, have taken admittedly difficult internal situation in their countries and gone completely the other way, so that you have concentration of power, you have intolerance, you have greater polarization in these countries, and that they are intolerant of criticism. And again, I think that that is what my biggest problem is with these governments. And I think that that they do aspire to play to the angry crowd, the angry mob. They stoke resentments and envy, and I do believe that while certainly Correa's behavior has not won him many fans in Washington or London or Stockholm or anywhere else, but it certainly appeals to the professional angry left in Latin America. And I think that, as Gustavo said earlier on, is that and that is an important foundation for which to continue to derive political power. And one last comment, Mark mentioned ATP DEA. These are trade preferences. I do think that Ecuador is going to lose them because of a whole host of actions by the Correa government that have compromised U.S. interests and that have abused U.S. investors in Ecuador. So I think that there is going to be a cost to him, but he's going to balance it out to see what kind of bounce he gets from, again, the angry left mobs in the region.
Okay, representing the angry left mobs in the region that happen to think that they can vote for a president and they'll actually do what they voted for. The nerve. It's a concept of democracy that's not recognized here in Washington. I want to just address the specifics of what Jaime said because, you know, one thing you said was not true. They said the government kills people. They haven't done that in Bolivia under Morales. There were some people beaten at demonstrations, as there are all over Europe every week. But it's true, police hit people in every country, and it's bad. I'm against it. But nobody was killed, unlike the previous government, where they killed a lot of people, and your former president is wanted right now. He's wanted for these crimes, for ordering the troops to kill people in demonstrations. And you talk about double standards. Where is the U.S.? Where are they in terms of extraditing this guy? Okay, no way. They're not going to do it. Goni is what I'm referring to. So that's the specifics. Now, on the more general theme, what do these movements, what do these governments represent? Are they just, you know, opportunist people on horseback, whatever? Well, let me tell you something. We can look at statistics, and you know, not just from the governments, but from CEPAL or anywhere else you want to look at, and you can see a vast difference in what happened in Latin America in the last decade, in poverty, in inequality, in access to health care, in education. You want me to go? I mean, you give me 20 minutes, I'll go through Argentina, Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Brazil, and you can find it on our website. You can see the vast difference in people's life. That's why those governments keep getting reelected, and they're going to keep getting reelected as long as they can run for office, okay? Because they've delivered something to people. And I know that's not part of democracy in the Washington way of viewing things. Here in Washington, democracy is, do these people do what we want them to do, okay? That's the definition of democracy in this town. But other people have another idea. They have an idea that if you vote for somebody and they promise you to do something, that they should listen to the people who voted for them and not just the richest people in the country. That's what's different about these governments. And it's also you know, different that they haven't used the kind of repression that the other governments have used. So that's what I think. That's why I think this is a great historic advance, and it's also changed the world. I'll end right here, but you can see 15 years ago, before you had any of these kind of independent governments in South America, Assange couldn't go anywhere in London for asylum, okay? Now you have government, any one of those governments. As I mentioned, Lula was one of Assange's first defenders, even though the cables that they released were very unflattering to the Brazilian government. And he stood up for him. Any one of those governments would recognize that he had a well-founded fear of persecution. 15 years ago, before these left governments were elected, no chance. That's why they're changing not only their own countries, but the world.
Gustavo.
Yeah, thank you. I want to refer to the point that we made about situation of dictatorship, of totalitarianism, and the discussion about it in Ecuador and in the region. And I just want to refer to what Anna Arendt says. And she did a remarkable work on totalitarianism. And if you read Anna Arendt, you see all these elements are part of what is going on in our countries. I'm not saying that exactly the same, but there's very important points for reflection, and we should consider this. And I made a conclusion that what is going on in Ecuador is not only, you know, we don't have to blame Correa and his group for this. It's a social problem we have, a social phenomenon we have. Something wrong we have done for such a long time that we produce this kind of monsters and that are killing our country's future. What have happened in Ecuador, it wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have oil, like Venezuela. Oil to buy consciousness, to increase spending on social needs, but in a way that keep us underdeveloped, keep us in ignorance, keep us so they can continue in power for eternity. That's the main problem. That's a tragedy. Regarding the wealth distribution, you said the caring about the rich and the poor. Just the other day, you can see on the internet Alberto Costa's interview, and he says that according to a report, official report he got from the government this year, it says that as a synthesis, the report says that never the rich in Ecuador were as rich as now. Never the rich were as rich as now, and never the poor was less bad than now. So that's the situation that keeps reproducing. Well, see the facts and refer to them. And he quoted a report, economic report, saying that just last year the rich. The most important economic groups in Ecuador had income for $30,000 million, an increase of 12%, and he considers that, estimates that altogether he had an increase of 50% of revenues in these 6 years of government. And what is the outcome of the 6 years? Still we have poverty, we have a terrible increase in violence, crime, drug trafficking. According to the DEA's report, Ecuador is in the United Nations of crime, international crime. People are scared or even leaving their houses because they are kidnapped or killed, and so on. I want just to make a last point about the importance of these elections. It's clear that the left is united, but it's not enough because they made too many mistakes. They gave the way so Korea could become a dictator in terms of concentration of power. They paved the way for that. And now they are discredited, and I am afraid that they won't have an important turnout because of that. Hopefully that will change on time. On the center and the right, also there are divisions. our position from Ecuadorians abroad is that they should unite, the left, the center, or right. What is at stake is democracy and the future of Ecuador, the possibility of changing our future, of taking us from underdevelopment to developed society. But we're following the rules of democracy, following the rules of division of powers, of independence, of justice. Maybe you don't feel that here because it's warranted. You know, you go out every day to your work and you know that you have independent justice that will defend you in any time. That's not the case in Ecuador. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we can all agree on at least one essential point, and maybe a few others, that these caudillos occur because of a failure of the political class in these countries historically to pay sufficient or even fair or due attention to poverty in their countries. And they come along and they are comfortable with weak political institutions that won't do anything systematic about extending economic opportunity to the very poor. And then so these caudillos come along, and I think what the tragedy is that yes, they are elected to make these kinds of important changes in terms of the well-being of the people, but their opportunistic character preoccupies them with ensuring they're being able to hold on to power in the most crass ways.
Have you seen the poverty rate in Latin America in the
Let me
last
just-
decade? It's fallen for like 45 to 27%.
Yeah, well,
It didn't move for like
they can
decade before that.
Mark, I think up to now, folks have been sort of polite about this.
Okay.
And they can consult your website. But that they set out to mug the democratic institutions that are essentially supposed to be protecting individual liberty and freedom. They go after the electoral authority, has been alluded to here. Freedom of expression is a key part of this, something that we really do take for granted. And the courts, the rule of law is up for grabs. And they do the same sorts of things that people on the right did. And so they're really not, they're squandering opportunities to finally do something systematically to help the very poor and help their countries progress and attract investment. Unfortunately, they're doing all the wrong things. In the courts in Ecuador, the government calls the shots, and the judges upload opinions onto their computers and issue them. The president weighs in on all these cases. I wish I were sort of optimistic about where they're headed, but I think at the very least we ought to applaud these people for taking some time to try to learn a little bit more about what's going on. I want to thank all the panelists who did an excellent job presenting various points of view, and we're adjourned. Thank you.